Okay, so good morning, everybody, and welcome to JALT International 2020. I am happy to introduce Kip Cates, who is going to present on teaching against prejudice, human rights, and EFL. Please go ahead.
Good, thank you so much, and welcome to everybody. Good morning. It's Monday, our last day of the JALT conference. So my name is Kip Cates. I'm a retired professor at Doctoral University, and I'm a former chair of JALT's Global Issues SIG. And in this workshop, we're going to have a chance to take a look at these two areas of human rights and teaching against prejudice. So we'll start with a bit of background, look a bit at human rights education, then get into some activities. Some famous human rights activities designed in the US, UK, and elsewhere. Human Rights Squared, types of human rights, the Universal Declaration. Up on the right, we'll do a ranking activity that I've designed, a few activities on prejudice, role plays, heroes, and finally some resources. So I hope this will be a rich hour for you. Feel free to take notes, and we'll have a chance maybe in the middle here and there to have a few comments with questions at the end. Let's go. So a bit of background, first of all. I teach at Doctoral University, and we have a special global studies program. Global Studies 1 has two parts. The first half is about world themes, where we have students study world religions, world languages, flags, and also about world regions, Asia, Africa, and so on. The second course is called Global Studies 2, and that is a global issues course. We look at four main areas: war and peace, human rights, development, and environment over one semester. So these are four different areas, and each area we take 3 weeks. 3 weeks on war and peace, 3 weeks on human rights, 3 weeks on development, and 3 weeks on environmental issues. It's a very special chance for us to get fairly deep into these various areas. So today I'll be introducing ideas, activities, resources from this second segment, human rights. Week number 1, week number 2, week number 3. Each week is 90 minutes, university level with Japanese EFL students. 3 weeks, 3 90-minute classes focused on human rights. Today we'll get a few examples from those classes I teach. Good. When we talk about teaching against prejudice, teaching for human rights, it's always good to go to the experts to find out what human rights education is. So let's take a look at this first page. Top left, introduction. We live in a world where large numbers of people are denied their basic human rights. A glance at any day's newspaper headlines will reveal incidents of genocide and apartheid, political repression and torture, discrimination and persecution of minorities, denial of individual freedoms and of entire people's rights to a homeland. International surveys show that these problems occur worldwide under regimes of all political persuasions. So our world is a world which faces a wide variety of human rights issues. So teaching objectives. For me, one of the major documents dealing with human rights education is the 1985 Council of Europe recommendation. And this has 5 main points. This Council of Europe recommendation says, number 1, the study of human rights in schools should lead to an understanding of and sympathy for the concepts of justice, equality, freedom, peace, dignity, individual rights, and democracy. Interesting phrasing, to understand and have sympathy for. Second point, the emphasis in teaching and learning about human rights should be positive. Too often, human rights can seem very dark and, kind of gloomy. Positive approach important. Third point, throughout their school career, all young people should learn about human rights as part of their preparation for life in a pluralistic democracy. For those of us teaching in schools, universities, especially in a public format, we want to prepare our students to be good citizens of our prefecture, of Japan, of Asia, of the wider world. Human rights education is a key part of that preparation. Fourth point, concepts associated with human rights can and should be acquired from an early age. Interesting point. Many people say, we should wait till they're adults, only advanced level language learners, but human rights educators say, no, no, no. Human rights gets down to basic issues such as fairness, which even children can understand. And last point, schools are communities which can and should be an example of the respect for the dignity of the individual and for difference, for tolerance, for equality of opportunity. In other words, schools, teachers can be role models. We have to model what it means to respect human rights by the way we run our classes, the way we run our institutions. Let's take a look on the right, teaching aims. We have 3 main points. Human rights educators seek to show students how we are part of a historical movement dedicated to promoting human rights for all, showing how slavery was abolished, how the right to a vote was achieved, how women's rights have improved. Second, we should aim to inspire learners with positive human rights role models. Martin Luther King, groups such as Amnesty International, inspiring students. And number 3, show learners how to put into action their commitment to human rights for all, not just teaching about human rights, but empowering students. And this leads down to our teaching approach at the bottom. Human rights educators also stress the importance of teaching about, teaching for, and teaching in human rights, these prepositions, about, for, and in. Teaching about rights involves giving students knowledge about human rights issues. Teaching for human rights is different. It means helping students develop the skills necessary to work for human rights, empowering them with skills. And teaching in human rights means creating a classroom atmosphere where the rights of all students are respected. There are a large number of good books on human rights education. This is kind of a comprehensive summary, but these are good starting points to think of when we embark on a unit, a lesson about teaching human rights, teaching against prejudice. For me, a good starting point is a video. There's a video called The Story of Human Rights. It's in 2 versions, English and Japanese, Jinken no Monogatari. It's on YouTube, 11 minutes total. It's a great video to kick things off. The video starts off with a question: what are human rights? And you can have students brainstorm, gosh, what are they? And basically, if we break this down, we can say that human is a member of the Homo sapiens species, a man, woman, or child, a person. And rights are things to which you are entitled or allowed, the freedoms that are guaranteed. So starting off with a very basic definition on this video we show. The video from there goes on to interview people on the street. It goes off and looks at people in different areas in South America, in Europe, the Middle East, saying, can you tell me what human rights are? And most people have no idea. Human rights? Gosh, I really don't know. I will try and see if I do a quick clip from YouTube, okay? We'll go down here and see if I can get this. And yeah, can you see the screen here?
Okay, I think you're going to stop your screen share once, stop your screen share, and then reshare your video,
okay,
your YouTube. So now share again and share your web browser that has YouTube open.
Okay, and then got that on. Okay, let's take a quick look then and see how this looks. See if it'll come here.
Human rights is, geez, that's a good question.
Human rights. Well, that's a tough one.
Wow.
I don't even know how to give that a definition.
I would probably have to do a little bit of homework or something.
Any right that I think just as a normal, human,
The rights that humans have.
Oh, that's a very large debate.
Så mange ting.
Tú le puedes preguntar a 20 personas y te van a dar 20 diferentes opiniones.
Non saprei, è una domanda complicatissima.
I guess we just take them for granted that they're there, but we don't even consider what they are.
Okay, go back to our PowerPoint, and I have to do another share, is that right? Stop there and go back to, okay, share our video. Here we go. Oops. And we'll. Okay, so again, this is kind of interesting for students to watch these people on the streets around the world saying, gosh, I really don't know. It's also a good task saying homework for class number 1, go off and interview 10 people and come back and report in English what people think about human rights. The video goes on to show the history of human rights. It's a nice 11-minute clip. People in the street, gosh, I don't know, then looking at human rights and the history of human rights. So I recommend strongly, if you have a chance, check out this video yourself. For teaching 11 minutes, it's a good start off. From there, we get students in small groups for discussion, right? Let's talk about you. Did you study human rights at school? What did you study? What did you learn? A short 3, 4, 5-minute group discussion in English, having students talk about their own experience. Always very interesting. From there, we move into our first activity. Initial video, activity number 1 is called Human Rights Squares. So this activity is from a book by David Scheinman, Teaching About Human Rights, an American high school textbook for human rights education. When I first saw this book, I said, wow, let's see how he's designed his curriculum. It's a 1 semester, 1 year course. And the very first thing he has is a game. Let's play a Human Rights Squares game. I took this and adapted it for language learning. So here is my version of David Scheinman's Human Rights Squares game. Put students in groups, 3 or 4 is good. Handout, Human Rights Squares. As you can see, there are 20 squares, and each square has a different topic. Topic number 1, a human right. Topic number 2, a country where rights are violated, and so on. And students' task is to write 1 example in each square. So you say, I'll give you 5, 10 minutes in your groups, brainstorm, and write 1 example for each topic in these 20 squares. When I first saw this, I was kind of curious how David Scheinman designed this. And I looked over here saying, he's got something, a movie about human rights. Young people like movies. Human rights sounds kind of distant. Once you talk about movies, that's right. That movie talks about human rights. That one's about women's rights and so on. Number 14, a singer who sings about human rights, bringing in pop music. There's that singer, he's got a song about, racism and so on. Maybe down here, number 18, a person who is a champion of human rights, brainstorming, who do we know? Who did we learn about in school? Martin Luther King and so on. And interestingly, number 20, a human rights violation that concerns you personally. What about you? What do you feel is important? So I put students in group. I give them 5, 10 minutes to brainstorm, to fill in as many squares as possible, 1 example each. And while students are working on the blackboard, I make this chart, and then we stop the class and take a look. We'll do a quick example with the first 8 here. Now, a bad way to approach this would be to say, okay, Keiko, number 1, gives an example. Takeshi, number 2, somebody else, number 3. 1 by 1 is, logical in some senses, but for me, that's kind of not so good. Keiko, number 1, give an example. Kate Sensei, I don't know, I couldn't get number 1. And you give a student a task that she couldn't do. She feels frustrated. She wasn't able to participate. So what I do is say, here are 20 squares. Choose a square, any square, free choice. So students might not have, half the squares filled in, but they do have some others. And if you say choose any square, they can put their hands up with confidence and say, let me choose maybe number 4. A group that wants to deny rights to others. I say, great, okay, give me an example. The example might be the Taliban. Please explain. You want students to explain what it is. They'll say, well, the Taliban wants to deny rights to girls for education in countries such as Pakistan, Malala. Very good. As you can see, what I've done is I've done this bilingually, English and Japanese. I don't use Japanese, I'm only using English, but the Japanese is there so students can follow along. Takeshi, choose a square, any square. Kate Sensei, I choose number 7, a movie about human rights. Give me your example. Selma, tell me about the movie. And students, again, self-expression. Selma is a movie about this Black civil rights movement in the USA. They try and explain in their own words. Next student, choose number 2, a country where human rights are violated. China, okay, tell me why. Well, in China, in Hong Kong, people aren't free to say their opinions. Uyghurs, Tibetans, they explain their thoughts. Next student chooses number 5, an organization, Amnesty International. Wow, surprise, they know it. Next student, maybe number 3, a group which was persecuted in the past. Many students will say, Yuryajin, Jewish people. And here is a grammar chance. You can get students to explain using passive voice. Where were Jewish people persecuted? Teacher, in Germany, okay. When were Jewish people persecuted? During World War II? Who were Jewish people persecuted by? The Nazis, Adolf Hitler, good. Why were Jewish people persecuted? Just because they were Jewish. Here is an oral grammar exercise using the passive voice, and you're getting students to explain about a certain group. Next student, choose a human right. Example, the right to education. All my students pop that up immediately. Or genro no jiu. How do you say that in English? Freedom of speech. One student might choose number 8, a country where people are tortured. What's your example? Maybe North Korea. And last student, maybe number 6, a country where people are denied rights because of their race. What's your example? The USA. Please explain. Black Lives Matter. People's skin color determines, how they're treated by the police and so on. So this is a chance to get students involved as a group, brainstorming, and then give them a free choice. Choose a square, any square. As they choose the square and give their example, you work with them so they're using English to explain their ideas. This takes a while, but it's kind of interesting. And from there, you can go and say, well, you've got some great ideas. As a teacher, I prepared my own ideas. Here they are. So I have a handout saying for these 20 different squares, here are some of my suggestions. For example, maybe number 3, give an example of a persecuted group. My handout would say Jewish people were persecuted by the Nazis. Christians were persecuted by the ancient Romans. The Burakumin were persecuted by people in Japan, giving students maybe some more information. Number 4, groups that want to deny rights to others. The KKK, perhaps, neo-Nazis, right-wing groups in Japan. So again, you can pick up a number of things. Human rights movies. For example, Schindler's List, never heard of it. It's about Jewish human rights in World War II. Mississippi Burning, Dances with Wolves, lots of examples from my side to expand students' knowledge. Countries that use torture, almost 120 countries around the world, shocking but true. And human rights in Japan. The right I try to stress is karoshi, people's right to rest. It's a basic human right, but in Japan, every year people die from overwork. So again, you can pick up a number of these groups that are denied the right to a homeland. Palestinians, Kurds, Tibetans, human rights singers, Stevie Wonder, Sting, John Lennon. Again, you can give your own examples to try to expand students' ideas. Rights denied to women, equal pay for equal work, and so on. Books, you might mention The Diary of Anne Frank, Uncle Tom's Cabin, or a famous Japanese book, Hashi no Naikawa, about the rights of Burakumin. And a right that concerns you, we can often go around the room. We say, okay, students, let's give an example. What right do you care about? One student cares about LGBT rights. Another student cares about the right to open opinion and so on. So here is one activity designed by an American human rights educator for high school. I've adapted it bilingual style as a brainstorming activity and an interactive Blackboard activity where students give examples and explain them. Maybe we can unmute the mics and get a few comments on this first activity, Human Rights Squares. What did you feel, your thoughts, maybe your suggestions?
I have a suggestion. Hello?
Julian, good to see you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Kip. It's so good to see you. Kip was my teacher. You're great. Yeah, another way to do it would be to do it as a group and have a reporter so that all the students would brainstorm, and then the reporter could write down all their answers so that when you ask the reporter represents the group. So it doesn't make one person stand out because they've all contributed.
That's great. Good suggestion. Thank you.
Just thinking.
Good. Other comments? Question?
Yeah, I just have a comment. Would you ever think about making this into a writing activity? So they do this brainstorming and then perhaps they choose one topic to write in depth about?
Absolutely. For me, I have 90 minutes, and this is one of the first activities just to get things going, get the juices flowing. You could give this as homework, saying, here's a list of 20, go home, research, come back. Or have students say, we've got 30 students, 20 students in the class, choose one square each, go home, research it, and next week, a short report by you on the square that you chose. So there's a lot of potential, as you say, for writing activities, homework research activities, students make a presentation. It's fairly flexible as how you use it, I think. But thanks for that suggestion. One more comment, question, anybody?
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi. I have a question about the number 2.
Yeah.
人権が侵害されている国, a country where human rights are violated. I'm teaching international relations course right now, and I have Chinese students in the course. When I talk about human rights abuse and violation, I would be very careful with my wording because I have the students. If I criticize one student, the China, and probably he feel marginalized or feel a little bit, I don't know, like have negative feeling. So when you have such diversity in your classroom, would you give a chance for him to speak and protect his position?
So yeah, this is not a debate class. These examples, again, are elicited from students. So students might pop something up. One student might say China, and you say, please explain why, and so on. I want to give them a chance to explain what they think is an example and why. And again, it's dicey. We have Taiwanese students and Chinese students in our classes sometimes. You have to be aware all the time. And what we're looking at is human rights and sort of general issues of, again, here persecution or violations of human rights, separating countries from people. I'm from country X. That doesn't mean I'm responsible for country X, or if country X is doing something bad, that's my fault or something. You have to tease out, I think, a little bit the differences. But you don't want to have the class stopped and get into a big fight between the Taiwanese and the Chinese or this or that. Trying to keep it smooth and respectful of each person. When the Taiwanese student has a chance, choose a square, any square, they give their example. We listen and we say, okay, interesting. Okay, we'll move on, but these are some good points you brought up.
I'm sorry, can I just ask one more question?
Yeah.
Do you talk about the difference between human rights and civil rights, or go into enforcement, or?
We'll come up to this next session where we'll mention that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So the next part is types of human rights. And I say, students, today we're going to look at 6 different types of human rights. What do you think those might be? And students brainstorm, but types of human rights, categories of human rights. And after a bit of brainstorming, I, on the PowerPoint, walk them through. The first category is civil and political rights. These are basic things. And again, you can pop here, the right to vote, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and so on. These are linked to civil and political. Second category is social and economic rights, the right to food, shelter, healthcare, employment, okay? Again, very different style. The right to a job, for example, the right to shelter. These are something quite different. I remember a Soviet student came to my university in the 1970s on an exchange program, and we had these arguments. I'd argue, you have no civil rights in Russia, no freedom of speech. He would argue back, you have no economic rights. There is no unemployment in the Soviet Union, and yet you have homeless people in the streets here in Canada. Interesting. Number 3 is minority rights. The rights of ethnic minorities, racial minorities, social minorities, Indigenous people. This is another very interesting category, looking at minority groups. Next would be women's rights. The right to equal pay for equal work, the right to a career and so on, the right to control your own body. Children's rights, another category, the right to special care, the right to education, the right to be protected. And last would be animal rights, or other rights. Other rights would include animal rights, the rights to a clean environment, environmental rights, the right to breathe clean air, the right to drink clean water, and so on. So this is quite an interesting mix for students the first time to think of human rights in various categories and to say, we have to, understand the whole broad sweep of human rights, that different rights fit into different categories. From there, we can say, wow, I wonder, is there a list somewhere? Somebody sat down to write a list of all the human rights? And surprise, surprise, they have. 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. World War II, Nazi Germany, the Holocaust, massive persecution, discrimination, and so on, led the UN to set up a special committee to design a declaration, a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of FDR. So this was a multinational committee that sat down and worked for a year or two, and then came out with this unique document in 1948. So, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, every United Nations member state, by joining the UN, promises to implement these human rights in their country and inform their people and students about these. So what are they? 30 basic human rights. Let's take a look. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there's some good video clips on the internet. We have, in simplified form here, the right to equality, number 1, the right to freedom from discrimination, number 2, life, liberty, number 4, freedom from slavery, 5, freedom from torture. Very basic things. As you browse through these, you can see the kind of basic things, 30 different articles in this Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 16, the right to marriage and a family. 18, the right to freedom of belief. 20, freedom of assembly. Number 24, the right to rest and leisure. When we finish the class and it's time for lunch or for a break, I say, students, according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 24, you have the right to rest, take a 15-minute break, and then come back for our next class. So these different rights, the 30 articles of the Universal Declaration, are things that everybody should know about. They should be in elementary, junior, senior high school, but many students, it's the first time in an English class at college to deal with these. Online, you can find a large number of posters, again, YouTube clips and so on. This is one that tries to break them out into different categories: economic, social, cultural there, civil, political here, and so on. It's a rich document that students should know about, and we play with that a little bit, students reading, finding examples in class. From there, looking at a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I then move to a similar rights ranking with an expanded list. And this is called Human Rights Ranking. Let's check about different countries. Let's use a checklist to rank the human rights score of countries around the world. Whoa, this is a very ambitious task. Here's how we do it. I say we're going to take a look at a list of 40 human rights, the Universal Declaration 30 plus 10 extra, and what we'll do is go through it briefly. Again, I've set it up bilingually. Japanese on the left and English on the right. The first section is their freedom to do the following things: travel in your country, travel outside, and so on. The second section is their freedom from, number 7, slavery, number 8, freedom from state killings, number 9, freedom from torture, and down we go for 18 there. Next page, freedom for or the rights to peaceful political opposition, multi-party elections. So we go through this very briefly. I have students read. Japanese is on the left, so I don't have to get into long vocabulary explanations. In the middle, legal rights, the right from deprivation of nationality to be considered innocent until proven guilty. And at the bottom, from number 36 onwards, personal rights to marriage, equality of the sexes, and so on. So this is a fairly ambitious list. It's a vocabulary task. I've got the Japanese on the left and the English on the right, but we're talking about legal terms, kind of human rights, special expressions, and I want to practice these before we jump into the activity. So I'll get students in pairs and say, okay, with this list, you've got the Japanese there. Quiz your partner. How do you say something, something in English? For example, number 11 is shikei in Japanese. How do you say shikei in English? That's capital punishment. Naruhodo. Number 32 is himitsu saiban. How do you say that in English? Secret trial. Good. Number 17 is seijiteki keitsu. How do you say that in English? Political censorship. New vocabulary. Number 28 is rodo kumiai. How do you say that in English? Trade union. So before we start with the ranking, we do a lot of vocabulary, and students are acquiring this special set of political, human rights, legal words, which are also very useful for civil, for current events, newspapers, and media. Good. Once we've got that, we can say, well, we've got this list of 40 human rights, and this is Japan. So why don't we do human rights of our country, Japan? I'm not Japanese, but you are. And this is our chance to check our own country against this list of human rights. This is a rare chance for students to evaluate their own country according to a criteria of human rights lists. So I explain. We've got this list of 40 human rights. In pairs or groups, read each human right, and if it's guaranteed in Japan, put a circle, maru. If you're not sure, partly guaranteed, you can put a triangle. If it's not guaranteed, use an X. And if you're not sure, just pop in a question mark, okay? So students get in groups and say, okay, let's take a look. Japan. Number 1, is there freedom to travel in Japan? Yes, no, put a circle, put an X, and so on. They work through this. It takes time, but 10 minutes or so on. But students are very eagerly evaluating their own country. In Japan, is there this? Is that guaranteed? And so on. So once students have finished, I say, okay, now I want you to add up all the circles for yes, all the X's for no, and give an overall score for Japan. I mean, it's your country. You've just evaluated it. Count up the number of zeros, of circles, number of X's, and give a score at the bottom. And this is always very interesting because students have widely different things. I say, okay, let's announce, what did you give Japan as its human rights score based on the way you evaluated those 40 rights? Student number 1, 96%. We thought, our group, Japan is almost perfect. Group number 2, we put 62%. Whoa, that's quite different. Group number 3, 74%, okay. Group number 5, 88%. Group number 6, 30%. These are all Japanese students, okay, who are evaluating their own country, Japan, against a set list of 40 human rights, and they're all over the place. Students say, hey, you gave 30% for Japan, 96%. This is a teachable moment why this exists. So at that point, I say, gosh, why are people's scores so different? I mean, you're all Japanese, but we have 90%, 30%, why? And the reason is some people look at Japan with a very easy eye and others with a more critical eye. What does it mean to have an easy eye? Well, is there freedom to travel in your own country? Of course. I don't need police permission to take a bus to Osaka. Yes. Is there freedom to travel outside your own country? Of course. I can, jump on a plane and fly to Hong Kong or to Hawaii, go shopping tomorrow. No problem. Freedom to hold peaceful meetings? Yeah, I think so. Teach ideas? No problem. Monitor? No problem. Publish? No problem. For people with a very easy eye, no problem at all. Japan, almost 100%. What about those with a more critical view? For me, this is very interesting. Is there freedom to travel in your own country, in Japan? This group, no. Please explain. Kate Sensei, in Japan, we have American military bases on Japanese soil. I'm Japanese, I'm not allowed to go inside that American military base, even though it's on Japanese territory. I'm not free to travel in my own country. Interesting point. Is there freedom to travel outside your own country? No. What do you mean? Well, to go outside, I need a passport. Who issues the passport? The Japanese government. What if they don't issue my passport? There have been examples of journalists who have been denied passports to travel overseas to do journalistic work. Hold peaceful meetings, again, question mark. Teach ideas, receive information. No, why? Because, for example, textbooks in schools are monitored by the Ministry of Education, and they censor some things. Interesting. So again, if you look at this particular group with very critical eyes, you can see their logic. Okay, that explains why Japan gets a human rights ranking of 30%. I say, well, we've got lots of ideas about you. What about the experts? Here's a book called The World Human Rights Guide. It was written by Charles Humana, who took the same 40 human rights we used in our list, and he did a check of 100 countries around the world. Let's take a look. What was his score for Japan? So in his book, he does the same 40 rights, goes through and ranks Japan. His score is 82%. Students, wow, interesting. How did he get his score? I photocopy the Japan page from this book. We hand it out as a handout, and take a look. So this is all in English and so on, but we've got the 40 rights, as you can see. The score at the top left, Japan is ranked 82% by this human rights expert. If you look on the left at the bottom, number 11, Japan has capital punishment, so it gets 1 point lost. In the middle, you can see number 22, is there social economic equality for women? No, there isn't. So Japan loses points here and there about women, equality, and various things. If Japan is 82%, what about other countries? Well, I also photocopy his list of rankings for other countries right here. So students are very curious at this point. Here's all these countries, okay, and what is their rank? So we say, what's the human rights rating for example, Saudi Arabia? The countries are listed in ABC alphabetical order. Saudi, Saudi, Saudi. The human rights rating is 29%. Woo, that's low. What about for Thailand? Top right. Thailand, Thailand. Okay, the human rights rating, narohoro. What about for the USA, okay? And for India. So you can get students in pairs to quiz each other. Ask your partner, what's the human rights rating for Brazil, for this and that? It's quite interesting. Then we come and ask some questions. What was the highest score of all countries? It was 99%. Which country got 99? Finland. That is almost perfect. On a list of 40 human rights, Finland had 99%, one of the best countries in the world. Lowest score was 17%. That was Burma and Iraq, okay? Top 5, Finland 99, 4 countries got 98, Denmark, Germany, Holland, New Zealand. That's amazing, almost perfect human rights situations. Bottom 5, Burma, Iraq, Sudan, China, North Korea. The world average was 62%. What about the date? When was this data? 1991, that's ancient history, okay? That's a long time ago. And how many countries got 100%? None did. Even Finland still has 1 or 2 human rights problems. It's kind of a nice summary in a way. Since this is 1991 data I'm giving students, the homework is obvious. Wow, what about today? Let's go out and do some example. You can send some students off to do some research there. Okay, 1 minute for comments and questions about this human rights ranking, ranking your own country according to human rights criteria. Thoughts, comments, or questions for a minute or so? Any questions or comments? Okay, let's move on then. From here, I'd like to pick up a few specific topics, beginning with women's rights. So women's rights is one of the 6 categories we looked at, and I spent 90 minutes looking at women's issues with a handout like this, a quiz about women. Today, for time's sake, we'll look at the top left to start with. Here, a short quiz. Number 1, when is International Women's Day? Anybody know? Answer is March 8th, right? Question 2, what country was ranked number 1 for gender equality in a 2017 survey of 145 nations? Answer is Iceland. Question 3, what was Japan's rank for gender equality? Japan was 114. On average, the salary for working women in Japan is what % of the salary for men? Sadly, it's still low, about 73, 75%. 5 and 6 are Olympic questions. Number 5, what % of athletes in the first modern Olympic Games in 1896 were women? The answer is 0. There were no women at all in the first Olympics. And number 6, what % of athletes were women in Rio? The answer is 45%. For Tokyo, we're guessing maybe it'll be 48, 49%, almost 50-50 finally. That took a long time. From there, we jump and look at voting rights. Here's a matching, countries on the left and the dates on the right when women gained the vote. 1893, the first country in the world to give women the right to vote was New Zealand. 1906 was Finland. 1920, the United States. Philippines, 1933. Japan, women didn't get the vote until 1945. And amazingly, Switzerland, 1971. Finally, women achieved the right to vote in Switzerland. This brings us to the next handout, giving students a list of the dates of women's right to vote. It's a fascinating list. Take a look. At the left, the earliest country, New Zealand in 1893, going all the way to the right, 1984, at the bottom on the right, Liechtenstein, European country, women didn't get the right to vote until 1984. So students are very curious, how does Japan rank with other countries? Japan was 1945. Again, we can give some questions. When did women gain the right to vote in Germany? Okay. Students check, 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 check. And the answer is 1928. Get in pairs, use the same question, quiz your partner. When did women gain the right to vote in China? 1953. When did women gain the right to vote in Bangladesh? 1972. For 3 or 4 minutes, students in pairs, buzzing, lots of energy, quizzing each other and learning about this vast difference in women gaining the right to vote around the country. Okay, women's issues is a big one. 90 minutes, I showed 2 brief activities. Let's move on to minority rights. For minority rights, I'd like to start with Indigenous people. And again, it's this section of our 6-part categories. We'll start with an example of North American Indians, and what I'm interested in is looking at image, information, and experience. First, what's our image of these Indigenous peoples? What information can we learn about them, and how can we experience that in some way? So image, asking students, what's your image of North American Indians? Get in groups and brainstorm. Students have all sorts of ideas. Again, it might be something like this. Native Indians, violent, dangerous, scary, watching TV Westerns, right? Cowboys and Indians, the bad guys are the Indians and so on. Get a sense of what students' images are. From image, you want to go to information, and that's where we start bringing in some information. Students can research, you can bring in your own fact sheets and so on. Again, surprisingly, in the US, 1.3% of the US population are Native Americans. So about 500 nations altogether, they're an important part of US society. Where did Native Americans live? You can find good maps online that show the original homelands of groups such as the Cheyenne, the Chinook, right? The Sioux, Powhatan, Cherokee, Chickasaw, etc., etc. So this is a whole new way of looking at a country, the US, and the original Native peoples, the Indigenous peoples who live there. What's happened to them now? Questions come up. Image, information. You start with a stereotype, then go and find out the situation, but experience is also important. Data is great, but you can't really feel much about data. So for information, I usually show a quick video clip, okay? There's a clip called Native American Teens, and again, I'll see if I can block out and give you a quick video clip here. Let's see. I have to share again on a sharing. Okay, over here. Got it. Here we go. Okay. There we go. Okay, I'm right down here. And sharing, I gotta go back here. Yep. Okay. Good. Video clip. Very useful to get it over the stereotypes, see young teenagers, Native Americans in the States. Short clip I used with students. Overcoming stereotypes, seeing the reality is an important part of teaching about minorities, especially Indigenous peoples. And another one is a good classic pop song, Paul Revere and the Raiders. If you haven't seen this, do take a look. It's a pop song written back in the 70s, I guess. Yeah, about the Cherokee Nation, the Trail of Tears. Very powerful, strongly recommended. Indigenous peoples, we have the Ainu here in Japan. I give students maybe a brief overview of the Ainu, maybe some data, right? Maori, New Zealand, how many are there? Maya, how many? What percent of different countries' populations? You can give students some examples to get them going and maybe have them take up one particular group. For this section of my human rights course, we'd give homework. The homework is to choose one indigenous group in Japan, one minority overseas, and to research them. For that, we have to brainstorm what kind of minorities are there in Japan, and students often may know some of these, right? Zainichi Koreans, foreign workers, Nikkei Brazilians, Ainu, Zainichi Chinese, Okinawans even, getting students to brainstorm about minorities in our country here. And again, this is my homework. The homework to profile 2 minorities, research homework, go off and profile 1 minority in Japan and 1 minority outside Japan. Local and global, Japan, the rest of the world, is a nice balance. For Japan, students choose maybe Burakumin or Ainu, maybe LGBT in Japan. Overseas, it might be Maori in New Zealand or Australian Aborigines, Blacks in the USA, etc. So this is a very special chance to look at minorities, 1 in Japan, 1 outside, and students usually do a good job doing these. Okay, our last section, we're going to take a look at prejudice. And for this particular part of the human rights curriculum I use, I've designed a kind of a brainstorming about 10 types of prejudice. To start with, we have to do a bit of vocabulary work. What's the difference between prejudice and discrimination? So prejudice is an attitude, right? Someone is prejudiced, they're prejudiced against others, that's an attitude. Discrimination is action. Discrimination is prejudice in behavior. So once you've made this clear, then you can get students to brainstorm, make groups of 3 or 4. Can you think of 10 different kinds of prejudice? Put them in groups and give them 3 or 4 minutes. Students eagerly brainstorming different kinds of prejudice. While students are doing this, I get some cards ready. I put 10 cards face down on each group's table. And after we brainstorm some activities, some ideas on the blackboard, I said, well, let's do this card game. So students turn over the cards 1 by 1, and their task is, for each card, read the type of discrimination, and then give an example from your own experience or from Japan or from the news. Number 1, lookism, discrimination based on physical appearance. Discuss, in my school, there was somebody who was very short, somebody who had glasses, people made fun of them. Number 2, ageism, discrimination based on age. That's right, people talk about examples. Abilityism, discrimination based on physical disabilities. Sexism, discrimination based on gender. Homophobia, discrimination based on sexual orientation. Racism based on race. Regional bias. National bias, nationality. Religious bias, religion. Social bias. So these are 10 different cards. Students get in groups, and card by card, they turn it over, read it, and discuss with examples, if they know them, from their own lives or from the news in Japan. From there, we might jump into a handout to warm things up, just to explain from the teacher's side. Lookism is discrimination based on appearance. If someone is tall or short, fat, so-called, thin, so-called, ugly, so-called, beautiful, so-called, appearance related. Ageism is age, young, old. Again, working through these very basic ideas so students understand what those types of prejudice are. Homophobia, racism, regional bias from a certain town. From there, I like to do an applied activity, saying I'm going to give you some example sentences. Which type of prejudice is it? Here they are. Number 1, I don't think he'll be a good teacher. He's got long hair. What kind of prejudice is that? Students answer, that's lookism, just because he's got long hair, prejudice. Number 2, she's from Totori, country Japan, so she's probably not very smart. Ouch, that is regional bias. And trust me, in Totori, we get this all the time. Number 3, be careful, you can't trust him, he's Jewish. Well, that's blatant religious bigotry. 4, I don't want my daughter to marry him, he's a truck driver. Well, social bias, different social class. 5, we can't let him join our sports club because he's gay, homophobia. 6, stop that Egyptian. He's an Arab, he might be a terrorist. Egyptian equals terrorist? Well, that's a national bias. 7, don't choose her for the computer job, right? She's in a wheelchair. That's abilityism, right? 8, we need an extra worker. John's no good. He's 65 years old, way over the hill. Ageism. 9, this hot spring is only for our people, not for her. She's Black. Racism. And 10, we need a man as prime minister. Women aren't suitable. Of course, sexism. These are 10 very basic types of prejudice. And you can assign students to go off and research each one, their own personal experience, in their schools and communities, in the news, in Japan and overseas. And students often have stories about how it felt to be, dealt with lookism, or because they're a certain part of Japan. These are awareness raising different types of prejudice. You can also deal with prejudice in terms of role plays, discrimination experience activities. One activity I used was an apartheid role play, which was kind of fun to do. When back in the apartheid days, an American high school teacher wrote a book called Stranger in Their Own Country, a curriculum on South Africa and apartheid. And he has a simulation that I used for years in my English class. Very few have all very poor. The Blacks are pushed into the room with very little territory. The whites can roam around the whole classroom at will. Very blatant discrimination. You play the game and then you start studying about South Africa because this was the way it actually was. Very, very powerful. Or if you like to use video,
Oh no, I think we just lost.
He got disconnected. Oh my gosh.
Okay, let's see if I can send him a link if I've got his email. I think I might have it. All right, let's try something. If I send him a direct link, you might be able to get back faster. I think I've got it in my email. Let's look for Kip. There we go. Hold on a second. Oh.
Kip is
muted, right? He's
he
muted. He's muted.
Because he came in, but he got kicked out once. Is he back?
Now I'm back. Yeah, sorry about that.
So now you need to make him
co-host again.
co-host, yeah.
Hold on and make you. Oh wait, how it didn't work. Wait, I'm going to the 1 second. Can't find the right thing. Hold on.
Bit of a
participants. There we go. Oh, you're still co-host, so you're fine. It didn't remove your co-host.
Okay. Great. Back to things that, yeah, Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes, highly recommended. Again, this is a unique video. It's online. It's an experiment where a teacher took a classroom of students in the US elementary school. Blue eyes and brown eyes separate the class. Blue eyes are superior the first day and get extra treatment. Brown eyes are discriminated against, and then she flipped to the second day. Again, if you don't know it, please check it out. To finish up then, a few final things. Human rights heroes, it's important to inspire students. People presenting people we like to look at examples of Jackie Robinson was the first Black Major League Baseball player, and his story is very dramatic, how he worked with his white manager to break the color barrier. Or Peter Benenson, the founder of Amnesty International, a British lawyer who looked in a newspaper and found an example of students protesting for freedom who were arrested just for drinking kampai, giving a toast to independence. Finally, human rights organizations. If you go on Wikipedia, you can see a page list of human rights organizations. There's hundreds there. And for me, I usually like to pick up maybe about 3 or 4. Amnesty International, all students should know about. Nobel Peace Prize winning human rights organization. Human Rights Watch, Anti-Slavery, and Freedom House.
Okay, really quick, you do realize your slideshow is not showing right now, right?
Oh, really?
When you came back, your PowerPoint was.
There's no slides.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a surprise. Okay, let's go back. Here we go.
I'm going to give you one more warning. We only have about 5 minutes left, just so you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, are we there? Slides, you
Yep.
can see.
Yep.
Good. Again, list of human rights organizations. You can see there's hundreds on Wikipedia. I pick up these 4. Human Rights Watch is a dynamic organization, good website, have students go off and research that. Anti-slavery is one of the oldest. It's 1839 founded and still going strong, working for a world free from slavery. Freedom House is an interesting group that ranks countries in terms of how free they are. They have an online map with the status, free, partly free, or not free. Great to have students go and check out their country, other countries about freedom. And Amnesty International, again, is one of the most important human rights organizations, founded in 1961, 2.8 million worldwide members, and working away. So what I would often do is maybe a jigsaw sharing. Groups of 4, student number 1 gets the Human Rights Watch information, student number 2, the anti-slavery, student number 3, Freedom House, student number 4, Amnesty International. Each gets a different organization, study it, then they have to give an oral presentation. Okay, I studied Amnesty, here's what it is, here's what it does. Okay, to finish up, resources. There are hundreds of great books. These are ones that I particularly recommend. David Chiman's book, Teaching About Human Rights, Nature of Prejudice, classic, different books about contemporary human rights activists, Graham Pike, David Selby, Human Rights Activity File in the UK. You've got human rights atlases. Amnesty has their own human rights curriculum. Japanese books, Sankagata, Jinken, Kyoikuron, I've got a chapter in there, and a handbook of human rights. If you're interested, I can send you the official biography that I use, the bibliography. Again, there's lots there for those of you who'd like to read up, see some YouTube clips, even in Japanese. Good. If you're interested in learning more about teaching human rights and human rights education, do join our JALT Global Issues SIG. Our SIG, Global Issues, tries to integrate ideas from peace, human rights, and environmental education into language teaching. We have a newsletter that goes out, and you can subscribe for 2,000 yen a year, or as a JALT member, become a Global Issues SIG member. And that's all from me. We have a bit of time for questions and answers and comments at the end. Thank you for your patience in going through a large number of human rights activities and topics. Open the floor for questions and comments.
We're giving a big round of applause. Thank you very much, Kip.
Good, you can unmute everybody and maybe we'll get some comments from people.
Yeah. Well, if nobody has comments at this very moment, I have a suggestion. Why doesn't everybody, on Hangouts is closed today, but everybody could head over to the SIG room. I just posted the link in chat, and you could go into the JAL room and continue talking for as long as you'd like.
Sounds good.
And then one more thing, to get the materials for me, I just really quickly had to run to the bathroom. So I don't know if I missed you saying it, but to get these materials that you made, like for example, the worksheets and whatnot, should we email you for those or?
Yeah, so today's presentation, there's a separate video which goes over the same thing which we popped up to JALT, but do email me directly. My email's here, and I'll be happy to send you off, MS Word or PDF copies of the handouts I used, list of bibliography, the videos and so on, even PowerPoints if you like. I'm very much into sharing what we have, so I'd be happy to send you what you need. Do email me at kipcates24@gmail.com.
Thank you. I have a question. Do you have these kind of materials for the other issues as well? Because you cover all development, so you have similar activities for each of the other issues.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it's an amazing course.
The Global Studies class is very activity heavy and getting students engaged and active. So for peace, human rights, development, environment, we're doing the similar things with topics in each of these areas. It's a lot of fun to teach. I'm really glad I'm able to do that. We need more courses like that that get students interested, involved, and excited about topics like human rights.
Okay, everybody, thank you very much. I'm very sorry. I do have to close the room because I have to actually host. I'm stopping the recording. I have to go host another